Today I am in Renaissance Venice. I'll move out of the way in a second so that you can see what's going on around me. You can see all the gondolas, right? Oh, right there. Venice is the city of, uh, they have those waterways instead of streets. It's still like that today. I'll do a more modern picture later in the week or next week, but you could see how important water access is to Venice, bustling city in the Renaissance. Also, I'm here at school today. Ta-da! We're back on campus, so if there's anybody who has the hybrid schedule, then you're allowed to come back to school as you see fit. The teachers are back today. Everything seems to be in working order. I came on Friday to make sure that my laptop was going to work, and it did. And so they feel fairly certain that I'm going to put Venice back. It looks better than my bookshelf, I think. They are fairly comfortable in the fact that things are going to be back to normal for us to be on campus. So, like I said, if you're on hybrid schedule, or if you're planning to switch to hybrid where you come 2 days a week, then we're here in the classroom for that. I guess everybody's here who's going to be joining us. Let me share my screen. I hope that you all had a good 3-day weekend. Anybody have any 3-day weekend stories to tell? Did you rest at least a little bit, hopefully? Okay. We're starting today with Othello. You should have read Act I for today. Othello is not a terribly long Shakespearean drama, so it's kind of perfect for us to fit in here while we're talking about Renaissance poetry. So for the next really the next 2 weeks, we'll be reading through the acts of Othello. There is a separate study guide for each act, and we'll be getting to the study guide today, so that if there's anything on there that you want me to go over, then I'm glad to do that. There are a few things in the Blackboard that I wanted to point out to you. So let me go to that. I debated about sending a message yesterday because I know that it was a day off, but I found a really good video series. Somebody or another made a video playlist of guided reading for Othello. And I think that could be helpful to you as you read. So what they did was you can go through and find whichever scene you're on and listen to that scene being read. I kind of listened to the beginning of each one of them, and just to see how they were. And it's basically some instructor going through and explaining the things that I would probably explain if we were going to go through the play, bit by bit. We're not, but in case that helps you, there is a good playlist. It's just not really in order. It's sort of in order. And then Act 5 and Act 4 are at the top for some reason. But that you can get that right here. I put new next to it so that you'd be able to find it on other materials in the unit at the bottom. So that's something that will be helpful for you. The other thing I wanted to mention is discussions. I've graded discussion number 2. So far, so good. I think people are generally doing pretty well, unless you forget to answer part of the question or something is up with your responses. Most people are making, at least an 80 on those. So those are coming out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how those are turning out. I do try to coach you in my comments so that you can increase your grade. There were a couple of hundreds, but usually my comments are not designed to be critical. They're designed to help you get a better score on the next one. So I'm hoping that you take it with that spirit when I say, try doing this, or I'd like to see more of that. Then it's just me saying I could give you a higher grade if these things were happening. There was a really good discussion, I think, about feminism in discussion number 2 in the Canterbury Tales, and I think that topic is especially well suited to discussion because there's just a wide range of opinions on feminism. Now, I do need to point out, I don't think it was in this class, but maybe, um, feminism was not a thing back in Chaucer's time. People in the Middle Ages weren't going around saying, "Oh, but what about women? Women should be equal." That just wasn't a concept for them. So I did get a couple of responses where people were posting um, about feminism being a movement at the time, and it wasn't. So, kind of make sure that you're overlapping your understanding of history with your understanding of literature. We're just taking the feminist lens and kind of like applying it to Chaucer and applying it to the wife of Bath. Um, I think that most people, whatever their opinion was about Chaucer being feminist or the wife of Bath being a feminist story, I think most people backed up their opinion well. I feel that most people also, even though there were divergent answers to that question, I think most people did a good job also of separating Chaucer from the wife of Bath. We have to remember that there are a couple of layers in the Canterbury Tales, right? So there's the layer of the author, Chaucer, who is creating this work, and he creates the wife of Bath, and the wife of Bath creates her tale. So we cannot say that the wife of Bath has the same mental thought process or opinions as Chaucer. We can't say that the characters in the wife of Bath's tale have the same mindset as the wife of Bath or Chaucer. They're all separate entities. So even though Chaucer created Wife of Bath, he's not creating himself, right? Obviously. So we could come down on the side that Chaucer is somewhat of a feminist, even if he never would have known what that was, just for including the voices of women and really fleshing the wife of Bath out as a character. And a lot of people pointed that out. The wife of Bath, is she feminist? I don't know. I think it depends on the definition that you use. There was a definition here for you to reference. And I know some of you did a really good job because you read it and quoted from it. But some other people just sort of went on their own definition of feminism, which wasn't complete. So, do make sure that you're looking at all the resources that are available for you on these when you're getting ready to post your responses. But for the most part, there was a good debate about whether or not the wife of Bath and her tale are feminist. I don't know. Some people came down on the side that it can't really be feminism if you're talking about women overpowering and controlling men. It's just shifting the balance of power, and that's not what feminism is about. That feminism is about equality, so it's not about taking men and dominating them, even though women have been dominated for generations. But other people said that the wife of Bath's tale is feminist because it brings up the idea that women can do the same things as men and, can manipulate and can take power and control over relationships. So I think that there were some really good discussions in among all the classes. I feel like I kind of was thinking it'd be cool if there was a discussion board where you could read what was going on in the other classes too, like one big discussion board for all 3 courses would be kind of cool so that you could interact with more people and different ideas over time. But I don't think that can happen on this platform. There is a discussion. There was not one this past week, but there is one this week. So let me take a few minutes to talk about that. And then we will get into Othello. If you have a comment, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. I think I've hinted already at the topic for this week's discussion. I do highly recommend that you start working on it a couple of days ahead of time. If you have something that comes up on Friday and most of it's already written, then it's not a big deal to submit. You can turn things in early. They're there. So I think that, it's good to start getting your thoughts down. I gave a lot of notes last week on Renaissance poetry. There was a PowerPoint, and then I talked about each one of the 8 poems that were assigned last week. So I think that it shouldn't be too difficult to answer this question. You're just going to have to make a choice on which poems you want to work with, and then kind of make sure that you've got a good analysis of them, and then relate them to the qualities of Renaissance poetry. So it says the flourishing of poetry as a form of expression is a main feature of English literature in the 16th century. Choose 2 or more poems we have read from English Renaissance literature. So that means it's going to go back to all of the ones that we did last week, the Spenser, Marlowe, and Raleigh, and then the Shakespearean sonnets. Those are the ones that you will be choosing from. You're choosing at least 2 and comparing and contrasting them in terms of style, structure, use of poetic devices, tone, topic, theme. And then the final question there is, how do these 2 poems demonstrate the qualities of Renaissance poetry? I did a PowerPoint on that. What are the qualities of Renaissance literature and specifically Renaissance poetry? So I would refer back to that. Even when I was going through that PowerPoint, I think it was on Tuesday last week, I showed you which slide was going to be crucial for helping you to do that discussion. So you can refer back to that PowerPoint. I do think that it is, I can show you where it is if you forgot. I know every instructor sets up their Blackboard differently, so it's right here, this slideshow, medieval and Renaissance poetry. So I would go back and I would, review your notes on what makes something Renaissance poetry. How do we know that something, has the characteristics of Renaissance poetry? And then that will be the focus for your discussion this week. Are there any questions about that topic for this week? I haven't had problems with people with length really. Just a couple things, but nothing major. Most people are extending and responding to the whole topic. So if you're just joining us, I did grade discussion number 2 already. There are only 3 grades in the East grade book for this 6 weeks, just so that you know. All the grades for the entire semester are already in both grade books. So you can look and see what's going to be graded when. Obviously, I have to grade things as they come up. But the way that it works out, because STC started later than East, the East grade book for the 4th 6 weeks closes out after the 3rd discussion. There's only 3 grades that will be on your report card for East coming up in a couple weeks here. So I think I put that on the calendar. Yeah, next week is the end of the 6 weeks. So I'll be grading discussion number 3, and then that will be it for the grades for the 4th 6 weeks, because that's just how they played out. The 5th 6 weeks has a good chunk of assignments because there are discussions, and then also essay number 1 falls in there, and so does the midterm. So there'll be a good variety of things in the 5th 6 weeks. If there aren't any questions on the discussion for this week, then I'll go ahead and start with Act 1 of Othello. If you have a question about something that you read or a line that you want me to discuss, then you can go ahead and put it in the chat. I am not going to go through the plot of Othello as we go through the acts. We'll talk about what happens in them. Maybe if we have time, I'll play a film version of the act, each one of the next 4, well, the next Tuesday and Thursday. We do have class this Friday, so but mainly we'll be talking about the first essay. But I'm not going to go through line by line and walk you through it. There's a very good video series that does that I was mentioning earlier, and also you're all good readers. So, but I am here to answer questions. So there's a couple of things that I want you to make notes about before we even start talking about Othello. I'm going to open up the study guide here. You should be able to answer all of these questions. This is not an assignment, remember, this is just to kind of guide you and make sure that you are reading at the level that you need to read to pass the midterm. There are a number of questions from Othello on the midterm. So sometimes I will pull out a quotation from the text and ask about the significance of it, just like I do on the study guides. Hint, hint. If it's important enough for the study guide, it's probably important enough for the midterm. Terminology, characters, and then some of these elements, these key concepts down here, are going to spark thematic statements later on. By the time we finish the play, you should be able to make a theme on each one of these concepts that are listed here. Every study guide has the same 10 because they all, happen throughout the play. So it would be a good idea to keep track of the concepts, how you see secrecy being introduced in Act 1 and developing through the subsequent acts. What about manipulation? What about prejudice or war or urgency? You can see almost all of these in Act 1. So if you want to, I can chat about any one of them. But let's take a few minutes just to go through and see. I'm sure you've already looked at this and kind of worked through after you read Act 1. You should have looked through the study guide to see if there are any topics that you want for me to talk about. So I'll leave it open for Act 1, Scene 1, which is the opening scene. A term that you need to know from the opening scene is in media res. Probably that's a term that you already know. IN space MEDIA space RES. In media res is the classic way of telling a tale, and Shakespeare does this fairly often in his plays. In media res just means in the middle of things. And many classical works do this going back to ancient times. Even, we saw that even in Oedipus, right? The city is already in anguish, right? The situation is already developing. So we start in media res with Rodrigo and Iago having a conversation. And that leads to the exposition. Act 1 is always the exposition of a drama. I think I put down here in the study guide. Yeah, dramatic structure. So dramatic structure just tells us that Act 1 of a play is the exposition, Act 2 is the rising action, Act 3 is the climax, Act 4 is the falling action, and Act 5 is the resolution. So at the end of Act 1, I should be able to ask you a question like, how does Act 1 set up the exposition? What are the elements that are presented right off the bat in Act 1, Scene 1? So you should know the relationship between Iago and Rodrigo. Do you want me to talk about that, or does everybody get it? Okay. Anything? I'm not going to just go through and answer these questions. That just takes up too much time. And if you already know the answers, then it's like extra time that we don't need to spend. So is there anything, you can just put a number there in the chat. Is there anything 1 through 7 from Scene 1 that you want me to discuss? Number 5, 7, okay. What information is given about the impending war? Well, we find out that because there's sort of high level people that are happening, that exist in these scenes, they're privy to information. And so we find out that there could be a war brewing. We also know that Othello is a general, we find out. So, and Iago is his, well, they call him his ancient, but he's basically his assistant type. So we find out that there is going to be uh, possibly a war. There's rumors about that. Number 7, oh treason of the blood. Let me go to the text because I want to look at the exact context of that one. Line one, what was it? 184. Oh, these lines are different. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, right here. So it's line 166. So these old plays, sometimes the line numbers are a little bit off because different versions add things and leave things off. So you just have to kind of look around for it. But it's right here on line 165. Brabantio is the father of Desdemona, and Desdemona and Othello have just married, and they married in secret. So when Rodrigo and Iago are conversing, Rodrigo is in love with Desdemona, and Iago has agreed to take money in order to help him win her. But now that seems quite difficult because she has married Othello. And so they go and they wake up her father and kind of like bother him in the middle of the night to tell him that his daughter has run off with and married Othello. And so Brabantio is completely upset about that because he didn't know anything about it. And he's upset also because Othello is a Moor and he is completely blindsided by the fact that she married him. And so he said, oh, treason of the blood, meaning she has betrayed him. I mean, just think about the marriage expectations of the Renaissance time period. Isn't that different from the Middle Ages? So it would be expected that your father would set up your marriage, just like we see in Romeo and Juliet. Did you all read Romeo and Juliet when you were freshmen? You did, right? Or whenever you took English 1, hopefully. Yeah. You didn't finish it? They die. Sorry to tell you. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Yeah. Romeo and Juliet both die. They both commit suicide. Okay, so yeah, so it's the same thing. He was probably expecting to find his own match for her, or definitely he wasn't thinking that she would marry Othello. Othello is older, and he's also black. He's a Moor from the north of Africa. So he's completely blindsided in the middle of the night by these guys that are telling him that she's married. So treason of the blood is like a betrayal, that his daughter has betrayed him. The blood because they're related, father and daughter. Scene 2 starts to get into more. Is there anything else from scene 1? Hopefully in your mind you can kind of run through those and make sure that you can answer those questions. There is a map here that I wanted to point out, that you can click on, and it's also in the extra materials in the Blackboard. Just so that you can see, because in scene 2 is when they start talking about, or scene 3, they start talking about how they're going to have to go to Cyprus. And these are all real places. Venice is a city now, not a duchy, but you get the idea. Venice is here on the water, and it's got all those canals for streets and so on. And so it's a waterway. And we find out that they're going to be heading over here to Cyprus. So there is a map here that will help you see distances and so on, because it's kind of crucial to understand how that's playing out in scene 2 and 3 and really throughout the play, because they do go to Cyprus. There's a separate setting where they go to Cyprus. You can kind of tell that at the end of the act that they're going to be going there. So, is there anything from the scene two list that you want me to spend some time talking about? Scene two is where we see Othello for the first time and his interaction with Iago. We also see Cassio for the first time in scene two. Othello has to balance two major things that are happening for him at the same time. One is that he's gearing up to go to Cyprus because it looks like there's going to be a war there with the Turks. And he also has to balance that with the fact that he has just married Desdemona that night. So he's got two big life events happening at once. None of the quotes. You don't want me to talk about anything in scene two? Everybody's got it? Okay. Whenever I'm pulling out a quote, it's usually, even if it's short, it's usually key to the scene, to the character, or to the development of the plot. So there's usually one of those main reasons why I pulled that particular quote. And the line numbers might be a little bit off, I'm noticing. It just depends on the version that you have, but I didn't go back through and fix all those, but you can usually find it. All right, what about scene three? Scene three includes most of the characters from before, except we have Desdemona who shows up in this scene. They call her because her father doesn't believe that Othello won her fairly, that he must have put a spell on her, right? There's no way my daughter would go with you willingly. You must have done your black magic, pun intended, on her, and so I'm going to take you to the Duke, who is the ruling person there in Venice, and we're going to sort this out because I believe you did a crime. He's accusing him, Othello, of a crime, and so they go to get Desdemona to support the fact that Othello says that he won her fair and square, and that he didn't really expect to, that they were just having conversations about his life, and she got super interested in that. And he's had a lot of war exploits and he's been all over, and so he's got a lot of stories to tell, and she just sort of fell in love with that. And she comes and she tells the court that she is of her right mind and that she has married Othello and loves him very much. The Duke and the Senators are also new characters in scene three, and so they're also kind of important to understand how they fit in. The Duke is the law, but also the head of the military. So he does both things, where he's trying to arbitrate the situation with Brabantio and Othello and their argument over the marriage, and he's also trying to handle the fact that a number of soldiers are going to have to be going off to war in Cyprus, and the senators have all shown up. Brabantio is a senator, by the way, and it's just that his concern in this scene is, the betrayal, or his perceived betrayal, of his daughter, and Othello taking advantage of her is what he thinks. So look through those questions. Is there anything in scene three that you want me to talk about? Any of these quotes? Number 9. What advice does Iago give to Rodrigo? Okay, so there's this subplot where Rodrigo has expressed to Iago, because we're in media res, we start in the very first scene with Rodrigo and Iago talking about how Rodrigo can get Desdemona for himself, but that is very difficult now because Desdemona has married Othello and she loves him very much. But Iago's getting paid by Rodrigo. He says that in Act 1. Let me see if I can find the line for you. Act 1, Scene 1, he says, it's almost one of the first things he says. Rodrigo says, I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, should know of this. So he says, you have my purse strings, meaning, I keep giving you money. And the reason that he's doing that is because Iago has promised that he will help him to win Desdemona, even though she's married to Othello now. And the advice that he gives to Rodrigo is basically don't give up. She's probably going to lose interest. She will probably not stay in love with him. And the only reason that he's keeping Rodrigo on the hook is because of the money. Iago wants to get more money from Rodrigo, where most people would be like, okay, she got married, I think I'll move on. Iago encourages Rodrigo because he wants to get more money from him. That is not nice. And that's maybe our first signals about Iago's evil qualities. He's clearly the antagonist in this play. We get the first clue of those here in Act 1, the exposition, for that reason. Hold on, somebody's at my door.
Morning, I'm just dropping by to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
We're able to log on, okay?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of class.
Okay. I know.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, have a great day.
Thank you for checking. No, it's B. Sorry, they're just double checking that everybody's able to sign on and that everything's working. It's good that they checked. Okay, 15. I saw Othello's visage in his mind, and to his honors and valiant parts did I my soul and fortunes consecrate. I love that line. So that's Desdemona. Desdemona, when she's brought before the court in scene 3, they ask her, you know, did you go with this man willingly? How is it that you fell in love? Because when they go to send for her, they ask Othello, how did you fall in love? And so they hear the whole story about that through his eyes. And then when she comes, she testifies and she basically says the same thing. And so that's how the Duke and the senators come to realize that it was it's true love, and that he didn't try to bewitch her, and that Brabantio is just upset because he didn't get to approve her choice ahead of time. Othello is not a bad catch. I mean, he's a war hero. He's going to lead the troops to Cyprus. The Senate trusts him implicitly, so does the Duke. He's well known and well liked. He's even measured. He's calm. I mean, he even speaks about her very tenderly and their love, and in scene 3 specifically, but also scene 2. And so the fact that she says, I saw Othello's visage in his mind. Visage is a face, right? So she says, I could see his future in his mind, and all of the parts that he was telling me from his stories, I believed it and wanted to take it as my own. I wanted to be part of him and all these things that he was telling me. So that's kind of a romantic line when she says that in front of the Senate, that she fell in love with him because of his stories, and she corroborates the whole backstory that he gave about love. And she even, there's a line that I might have put on here. Oh yeah, 13. I do perceive here a divided duty is also Desdemona. That's one of the first things she says, because she knows that she's been brought before the Senate basically because of her dad's objection to her marriage. But she says, you know, it's just like every woman that gets married, at some point you have to put your father behind you and, you know, go with your husband. And, you know, she's kind of saying to her father in front of everybody, this is the natural order of things, and you just have to accept that Othello is my husband. You could do a lot worse, actually. But there is some perceived racism. There are some lines that, you know, speak to Othello being thick-lipped and all kinds of other stereotypical elements. Iago especially sort of feeds into the idea that Othello is different. He's not Venetian born, but he is the Moor of Venice, is what they call him at the beginning of the play. He's done a great service for Venice, so nobody questions his loyalties. But Iago brings up some racial elements. Anything else on scene 3? All right, so you should be able to explain how Act 1 sets up the exposition. Remember, when we talk about exposition, we mean the setting, the characters, the basic conflicts, the relationships among characters, that sort of thing. You should be able to identify those things from Act 1, and you should also be able to identify how Act 1 can contribute to the rising action. Well, we already know that there's a conflict between Brabantio and Othello. It's kind of, you know, simmered down at the end of the act because the Duke doesn't think that it's an important thing as soon as he finds out that the two are in love. But that doesn't mean that Brabantio is going to completely accept it either. He says that he will, but that's still an issue. Also, there is a soliloquy that Iago gives at the end of scene 3. You didn't ask me about it. It's question number 10 up here. But he gives a soliloquy that makes it clear that he is out for Othello, and Othello has no idea about it. Iago was passed over for a promotion, and instead Cassio got it. So he's very upset about that. And so Iago is angry at Othello and at Cassio, and by extension, Desdemona, because she's married to Othello. So he, in his soliloquy, talks about how he has a goal of ruining them. So there's also that element of rising action. We're going to see his plotting continue. Shakespeare doesn't keep that a secret. It's a secret from Othello and Desdemona and Cassio, but it's not a secret to us. So we have that dramatic irony happening throughout the play. Are there any concepts here that are listed that you want me to talk about how they're expressed in Act 1? It would probably be a good idea to, make a chart or something where you could trace how these concepts become more complicated over the acts and how things, progress in terms of these concepts, because it will help you to write a thematic statement at the end. Transformation. I don't think transformation is a super prominent one in Act 1 because we're just starting with transformation. There has to be, like a time frame that has to pass. But I will say that there's a transformation here with Desdemona. She's transferring from being a daughter to being a wife. And that's a main feature in this act because she's obviously leaving her father's household to go with Othello. So there's that transformation. Also the transformation of Brabantio, who has to accept that, that's slightly there. I think you'll see transformation showing up a little bit more in later acts once Act 1 is established, because transformation means you're changing from what was. Okay. Do you want to watch the first act? I don't think it's very long. I have a version of Othello that I can play.